In the quaint town where secrets whispered through ancient oaks, a story of betrayal and redemption was about to unfold. The rain fell mercilessly on the day of Stephanie Brown's funeral, as if heaven itself wept for the gathered mourners. Heavy droplets cascaded down black umbrellas, drumming against weathered headstones while a bitter wind cut through the mourners' dark attire. The sounds of falling rain mingled with heartbroken sobs, filling the cemetery with an endless symphony of grief. Stephanie Brown lay peacefully in her polished mahogany coffin, radiant in a bed of pure white flowers. She had been the heart of her family and a beacon of light in their community, now forever sealed in eternal silence. Ryan stood before her grave, his face a mask of staged grief that couldn't quite hide the discomfort lurking beneath. Their teenage children, Chloe and Matthew, clung to each other desperately seeking comfort, their tear-stained faces and swollen eyes searching for answers in the void their mother's absence had created. Their world had crumbled in mere days, and they struggled to comprehend the loss of their beloved mother, their anchor in life's storms. Ryan drew a deep breath, feeling the weight of accusatory stares from the gathered mourners. He knew many condemned him, and some even suspected the secret he was trying so desperately to hide. But it was Kendra who unsettled him most. The woman who had sparked his personal tempest stood at a distance, veiled in black, her eyes never leaving him. As the priest began his final sermon, murmurs arose among the funeral attendees. Ryan couldn't focus on the holy man's words, his mind torn between memories of Stephanie and the forbidden secret he now shared with Kendra. He closed his eyes, trying to shut out the guilt that threatened to consume him. The priest spoke of Stephanie's kindness, her generosity, and the profound impact she had on everyone around her. The mourners nodded silently, some weeping softly as they remembered their own precious moments with her. Ryan was hurt by every word, realizing that he didn't deserve to be there, that he'd never be the husband she needed. When the priest called for a moment of silence, the mourners bowed their heads in respect. But Ryan kept his eyes open, scanned the crowd, and finally spotted Kendra, standing silently, her lip trembling as she fought back tears. In that moment, Ryan felt a turbulent mix of attraction, guilt, and emotions he couldn't name, tormenting his already troubled soul. Thunder rolled in the distance as the gravediggers began lowering the casket. Chloe and Matthew clung tighter to each other, their tears flowing without end. Ryan wanted to comfort them, but his trembling hand stopped short, unable to bridge the gap. He couldn't meet their eyes, not with the weight of his actions pressing down on him. As the casket touched the bottom of the grave, the first shovel of earth fell, the sound echoing in every mourner's heart, marking the end of a life well lived. The crowd began to disperse slowly, offering words of comfort to the family. Ryan remained rooted to the spot, staring at the grave while Kendra watched from afar as the crowd thinned. She yearned to approach him but knew in her heart this wasn't the moment. She recognized his pain was real, though it stemmed not from losing Stephanie Brown but from the crushing weight of his own guilt. Then, a voice cut through the rain, "I'm here because I have something to tell your father." Ryan felt the world grind to a halt around him, a moment he'd known would come but was never prepared to face. The children looked at him questioningly, and he realized this was the moment that would change his life forever. Though the rain had ceased, the wind continued to moan through the cemetery like a mourner's lament. The ancient trees swayed ominously, casting unsettling shadows across the weathered headstones. The few remaining attendees remained in an awkward silence. Before Stephanie's grave, the air hung heavy and still, as if fate itself had paused to witness what was about to unfold.
I stood there that day, completely still, my spine straight as steel while watching Ryan, my father, shrink before me with a weakness I never expected to see. There is determination in his eyes, but in his eyes I saw a man helpless against the lies he had created. Through the thick silence, I heard Chloe's trembling voice, a mix of confusion and courage, asking me why I was there and what I needed to tell her father. Without breaking my gaze from Ryan, I let a slight smile cross my lips as I revealed that their mother had asked me to come, that she knew the truth and wanted her children to know it too. My words rang out. Chloe took a step back, and Matthew looked at his father, disbelief and fear in his eyes. When Matthew asked in a hushed whisper what the truth was, Ryan's face fell and he turned pale. I could see in his eyes that while he had feared this moment for years, he never imagined it would come like this, at his wife's funeral. With movements that felt almost surreal in their grace, I stepped forward and spoke the words that would change everything. I'm Sienna, your father's daughter, and your sister. The air seemed to vanish from around us as Chloe and Matthew froze, their minds struggling to process what they'd just heard. Ryan tried to speak, but no words came out, his throat was dry, and I could almost hear his heart pounding. Chloe's voice burst forth with denial, screaming that her father would never do such a thing, but I could see the truth dawning in her eyes as she looked at Ryan's defeated expression. I maintained my composure as I explained how their mother had discovered my existence and reached out to me herself. I told them how she had wanted this truth to come to light, how she had accepted me despite understanding what this meant for her marriage. From my bag I pulled out an old envelope with a Stephanie Brown, clearly written on it. I explained that this was their mother's letter to them, that she had known this day would come and had prepared for it. I watched as Chloe and Matthew stared at the envelope as if it were some cursed object, their hands trembling but neither daring to open it. Finally, Chloe found the courage to open it, her fingers shaking as she carefully unfolded the paper and began to read their mother's last words. The letter spoke of love and understanding, of pain and forgiveness, of a mother's wish for her children to accept their newfound sister despite the circumstances. Tears streamed down Chloe's face as she read, the letter slipping from her hands before she could finish. Matthew turned to his father, searching for answers, but Ryan remained silent, trapped in his own guilt. When Matthew finally asked if it was true, his voice cracking with emotion, I felt my heart break a little more for this family I hoped to become part of. Ryan could only nod and whisper, "Yes, it's true," his head bowed in shame. The letter slipped from Chloe's hands as she broke into heart-wrenching sobs, her shoulders shaking uncontrollably. Matthew ran his fingers through his hair in distress, struggling to process this new reality that had been thrust upon him. My heart ached as Chloe finally screamed out, her voice filled with both anger and sorrow, demanding to know how her father could have done this to them, to their mother. Ryan tried to respond, but I could see the words dying in his throat, trapped behind years of guilt. That's when I felt compelled to speak, my voice carrying both determination and vulnerability. I never asked to be born into this situation. I needed them to understand that I hadn't chosen to be part of this chaos, but I was there because their mother had believed in me, and she had trusted that we could overcome everything and become a family. I saw the hatred in Chloe's eyes as she looked at me, but beneath it, there was a tiny spark of curiosity that gave me hope. Her words cut deep when she declared I wasn't family, that I was just living proof of her father's betrayal. I chose not to respond, knowing there were no words that could ease Chloe's pain in that moment. Deep in my heart, though, I knew this was just the beginning of our journey. I watched as Ryan stood frozen between two worlds, his children who looked at him with hatred, and me, desperately seeking my place in this family. The twilight faded into a starless night, as if the universe itself refused to light our path forward. The cemetery had emptied, but the echoes of our emotional confrontation still hung heavy in the air. Ryan stood beside Stephanie's grave, wrapped in guilty silence, unable to find words to heal the wounds he'd inflicted. Chloe and Matthew stood apart from us, their black-coated figures trembling with the weight of the secret they'd just learned. I could see Chloe fighting to maintain control, though tears continued to stream down her face. Matthew paced back and forth, mumbling to himself as he tried to make sense of everything. Standing near the graves, I felt weak and yet strong at the same time, my presence suddenly appearing in their lives. Though I didn't regret facing the truth, I knew I wouldn't be accepted immediately. What kept me standing there was my determination to honor Stephanie, the only person who had believed in me from the moment we met. When Chloe's cold, accusatory voice broke the silence, asking why I had chosen this moment to appear, her eyes pierced me with hatred.
Ryan closed his eyes and felt Stephanie's decision weigh on his conscience. The memory of that fateful day when Stephanie first confronted him blazed in his mind with crystal clarity. He had braced himself for screaming, accusations, and threats of divorce, a storm of rage he knew he deserved. Instead, she had simply gazed at him with eyes so full of sorrow that it struck him speechless, her quiet pain more devastating than any fury could have been. "I can't forgive you, never." Chloe's words were sharp, and Ryan was again speechless. Matthew said very little, but the hatred in him was clear. "What do you plan to do now?" Matthew asked Sienna, his voice carefully controlled like a judge delivering a verdict. "Your purpose has been fulfilled. I know you exist, but that doesn't change anything. We can never be a family, not after what happened," he said carefully.
I swallowed hard, feeling Matthew's words cut deeper than I had expected. "I'm not here to force anything," I said firmly, keeping my voice steady, despite the pain in my heart. I explained that I was only there to fulfill Stephanie's wishes, not to replace her or claim a place that wasn't rightfully mine. All I wanted was for them to know how much their mother had loved them, how her love had remained unchanging even after learning the truth. Stephanie's name hung in the air like a bittersweet melody, filling the space between us with its gentle echo. I watched as Chloe and Matthew exchanged glances, and for just a moment, I saw their personal burden overshadow their hatred for their father and me. When Chloe finally spoke again, her voice was calmer but still tense, telling me this wasn't over, that they needed time to process everything. She warned me not to expect easy acceptance, and I could hear the struggle in her voice. "I'm not expecting a fairy tale ending," I replied honestly, and I saw my candor soften her harsh expression just slightly. I told her I wasn't expecting anything, just hoping for a chance, and that I would understand if that chance never came. As everyone began to drift away, with Chloe and Matthew leaving together, Ryan and I were left standing before Stephanie's grave. The silence between us felt heavy, weighted with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. I heard Ryan mumble, more to himself than to me, that he had ruined everything, lost the only woman who truly loved him and was now losing his children too. Looking at him, I felt a mix of sympathy and anger stirring in my chest. "You're right," I said bluntly, knowing honesty was all we had left. "You've destroyed a lot, but there's still a chance to repair some of it. That depends on you."
Ryan remained silent, his gaze fixed on Stephanie's headstone, searching the engraved letters as if they might hold the key to his redemption. Deep in his heart, he knew the path to atonement would be long and arduous, if redemption was even possible at all. It was night in the small town, and ominous shadows fell over the streets. Inside their home, footsteps echoed through empty hallways, amplifying the loneliness that had seeped into every corner since Stephanie's passing. The house, once filled with joy and laughter, is now a space of silence. In the living room, Chloe and Matthew sat staring at the weakly flickering fireplace, both lost in the depths of their thoughts. Their mother's letter lay open on the coffee table, its words a stark reminder of the truth that had forever altered the fabric of their lives. How could he do this to Mom? Chloe's voice shattered the silence, heavy with anger and grief. She turned to Matthew with tear-swollen eyes, confessing how she'd always believed they were the perfect family, never imagining their father capable of such betrayal. Matthew didn't respond immediately, his gaze locked on the dying embers while his trembling hands betrayed the emotional storm raging within. "Maybe we weren't perfect all along," he finally said, his voice weak. "Maybe we were just good at pretending to be." Chloe stared at him in disbelief, demanding to know if that was all, if he felt no anger, no sense of betrayal. "Of course I'm angry," Matthew's voice rose for the first time, raw with emotion. But shouting won't bring Mom back, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive Dad. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the front door creaking open, and Ryan stumbled in with unsteady steps. His once proud posture was broken, his face haggard and worn, bearing the obvious signs of seeking solace in alcohol since Stephanie's death. "Why are you here?" Chloe sprang to her feet, her voice sharp with accusation. "Come to tell more lies?" Ryan raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, his voice hoarse as he pleaded that he hadn't come to fight, only to talk. Though Matthew interrupted, his expression was as cold and unyielding as his sister's. With a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of all his sins, Ryan collapsed onto the sofa and buried his face in his trembling hands. "I know nothing I say can change how you feel," Ryan began, his words heavy with the weight of his sins. His trembling voice confessed that he had hurt his children, betrayed their mother, and would likely never be forgiven, but there was something they needed to know. Chloe stood with arms crossed, waiting, while Matthew tilted his head slightly, listening with cautious attention. "Sienna isn't just a mistake," Ryan confessed, his voice quivering like a leaf in autumn. "She's part of a past I never had the courage to face." He revealed that Louise, Sienna's mother, was a woman he had loved before meeting Stephanie, but he had lacked the courage to stay when he learned of the pregnancy. When he met Stephanie later, he believed he could start anew, bury his past beneath fresh promises, but karma had finally caught up with him. The silence that followed was unbearable until Chloe broke it. "Why didn't Mom tell us anything?" she asked sharply. "If she knew, why didn't she tell us the truth?" "To protect you," Ryan answered softly. "Your mother was stronger than I ever was. She found Sienna and accepted her, never condemned me for what I'd done. Instead, she wanted to shield you from bearing the weight of my mistakes." Chloe and Matthew exchanged glances, their anger still burning bright, yet beginning to understand the magnitude of their mother's sacrifice. "So what now?" Matthew finally asked, his voice cutting through the tension. "We're supposed to accept Sienna and pretend everything's normal." "I don't expect anything," Ryan admitted weakly. "I just hope that one day you'll forgive me. Not for me, but for your own sake. So that you don't let this hatred poison your hearts." Chloe stood abruptly, unable to bear another moment. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said through her tears. "But if I ever do, it will be for Mom's sake." With that she left the room. Matthew searched his father's face for any sign of hope, but found only a broken man staring back at him. "This is such a mess," he said coldly. "I don't know if it can be fixed. Right now, I can't even look at you." Ryan nodded, accepting his punishment like a condemned man, and left the house. In his wake, Matthew and Chloe remained wrapped in a silence that seemed to stretch into eternity. In the house where Chloe and Matthew lived, breakfast proceeded in an uncomfortable silence that hung over them like a heavy winter fog. Neither had slept much, their exhausted faces reflecting the turmoil of their restless nights. They sat at the table, their untouched food growing cold before them, trapped in their own thoughts. "Have you thought about what we're going to do?" Matthew finally broke the suffocating silence. Chloe stared into her coffee cup as if searching for answers in its dark depths before lifting her face, frustration etched in every line. "Do? What can we do?" she demanded, her voice bitter as unsweetened coffee. "Mom is gone, Dad betrayed us, and that woman expects us to welcome her like nothing happened." "But it's not all her fault," Matthew replied, his voice steady as a lighthouse in a storm. "Sienna didn't choose to be born into this situation. Dad is the one who made the mistakes. That doesn't mean I have to accept this reality so easily." Chloe jumped up from her seat, spilling coffee across the pristine tablecloth. Her voice cracked with emotion as she demanded to know how her brother could remain so calm when she felt like she was drowning in her own emotions. Matthew sighed but offered no argument, the storm in his own heart visible in his troubled eyes. Meanwhile, Ryan wandered aimlessly through the town streets, each step a reminder of the weight of his sins. Stephanie's name seemed to whisper from every corner, haunting him like a gentle ghost. He found himself in the small park where he and Stephanie had often walked in their younger days, collapsing onto a bench as the memories overwhelmed him. He couldn't hold back the tears as he remembered her radiant smile, the way she had always encouraged him even in his darkest moments. "I'm sorry," he whispered through his tears, knowing his words would never reach her ears. Suddenly, footsteps broke through the morning silence, shattering his solitary grief.
I found Ryan in the park, his shoulders hunched with grief. Approaching cautiously, I pulled my light coat closer around me, my own face a mirror of his sorrow and determination. I stopped a few steps away from him, watching as he quickly wiped away his tears and struggled to compose himself. He told me he often came here to think that this had been Stephanie's favorite place. I nodded and sat beside him, maintaining a careful distance between us. We sat in silence for a while, a heavy silence, but not an uncomfortable one. Finally, I gathered my courage and broke that silence, needing him to understand something important. I explained that I hadn't come to destroy his life or his children's lives. I was there because Stephanie had given me an unexpected chance, though I confessed I wasn't sure how to honor her memory properly. As Ryan looked at me, I saw recognition flash across his face. He was finally seeing my mother Louise in my features. I could tell my presence forced him to confront the path he had chosen and its consequences, while also reminding him of his current responsibilities. His voice trembled as he acknowledged the courage it had taken for me to come forward. He admitted that I was doing something he had never been able to do in all these years. He told me that if Stephanie had believed in me, then he should too, though he warned that Chloe and Matthew would need time. "I know," I said softly, my voice carrying both understanding and resignation. As we talked, the clouds began to part, allowing rays of sunlight to filter through the trees. Those beams of light felt like tiny fragments of hope breaking through our darkness, offering a glimmer of possibility for the future.
In another part of town, Kendra paced her small apartment, her heart burning with fury and betrayal. Since the funeral, Ryan's silence had eaten away at her like acid on metal, corroding her last threads of patience. She had expected that after Stephanie's death, she and Ryan could finally step into the light together, but now everything had become infinitely more complicated. "I won't just sit here waiting anymore," she screamed, hurling a glass against the wall with enough force to shatter both the crystal and her remaining composure. A new determination crystallized within her. If Ryan wouldn't come to her, she would go to him. Though she knew their relationship could never be public, the weight of secrecy had become unbearable, crushing her beneath its burden. When she reached the park, the sight of Ryan sitting beside Sienna sent fresh waves of rage coursing through her veins. Without thinking, without caring about the curious glances from passers-by, she stormed toward them like a hurricane seeking its target. "So this is where you've been hiding, Ryan," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "While I'm trapped at home alone, you're here enjoying a cozy chat with your daughter."
Suddenly, a woman appeared before us, so shocking that I looked up in shock. I watched as Ryan quickly stood up, trying to defuse the situation with a calm that seemed forced. He told her this wasn't the right time, his voice strained with tension. The woman, Kendra, crossed her arms and demanded to know when the right time would be, her words bitter as she reminded him of promises to come for her once his problems were solved. Feeling the awkwardness of the situation, I stood and offered to leave. But Kendra's response made me shiver. She told me not to move, and with a creepy smile suggested I should listen to her. Ryan's voice suddenly became sharper as he firmly told Kendra that he couldn't do anything more about their situation and asked her to wait while he dealt with some family issues. I saw the hurt and anger warring in Kendra's eyes as she stared at Ryan, telling him she was tired of his constant excuses. Then Kendra turned and left, leaving only silence between Ryan and me. When I finally found my voice, I asked him who she was, though part of me already feared the answer. Ryan's sigh seemed to carry the weight of yet another confession, as he admitted that Kendra was another mistake he had made. I looked at him with reproach, but said nothing more, knowing that any accusations would only echo in the void of his accumulated regrets.
As evening descended, the town was bathed in golden light, as if nature itself reflected the sorrow of all those touched by this tragedy. In her room, Chloe paced restlessly, unable to quiet the turbulent thoughts that plagued her mind. Her mother's presence lingered in every corner of the house, her scent still clung to the curtains, her laughter seemed to echo through the hallways. The family photos on the walls told stories of happier days that now seemed like scenes from someone else's life. In the living room, Matthew sat staring at their mother's letter, reading the words over and over, searching for comfort but finding only an emptiness that spread through his chest like a hollow ache. His heart was being torn apart between anger at his father and the forgiveness his mother's words asked of them. "What are we going to do?" Chloe's voice broke the silence from the doorway. Matthew lifted his weary face, admitting he didn't know, that everything felt wrong no matter what they did. "We can't accept her," Chloe declared firmly. "Sienna isn't part of this family. Mom couldn't have wanted our lives destroyed like this." Matthew sighed heavily, questioning if that was really true, reminding her that their mother's letter showed she had accepted Sienna and wanted them to do the same. "How can you think so simply about this?" Chloe's voice cracked with emotion, tears welling in her eyes. She saw Sienna as living proof of their father's betrayal, a constant reminder of how much their mother had suffered because of him. "That's not Sienna's fault," Matthew responded, his voice growing firmer. "If you want to blame someone, blame Dad. She didn't choose to be born into this." Chloe tried to respond but the words died in her throat, and she turned and left the room, leaving Matthew alone. Meanwhile, in a hotel room where he'd taken temporary refuge, unable to face returning home, Ryan sat studying an old photograph of Stephanie. It had been taken years ago on a sunny beach, her hair dancing in the wind, her smile radiant, her eyes filled with a happiness now lost forever. "I betrayed you," he whispered, clutching the photo to his chest. A knock at the door jolted him back to reality.
I stood outside Ryan's hotel room, my heart pounding as I remembered him giving me his address earlier in the park. Hesitation clouded my mind as I knocked, apologizing for the sudden visit and asking if I could come in. I watched as he carefully placed a photograph on the desk before inviting me inside. After closing the door, I sat across from him, letting silence fill the space between us, a silence heavy with unasked questions and answers we weren't sure how to give. Finally, gathering my courage, I told him I had one question to ask. When he asked what it was, I could see him bracing himself for whatever might come. "Why did you never look for me?" The words fell from my lips, simple yet weighted with years of pain. I told him about growing up without a father, watching my mother struggle to give me a decent life, all while knowing he was out there somewhere with his other family, not caring about my existence. Ryan couldn't meet my eyes, crushed by guilt as he admitted to being a coward. He confessed that searching for me would have meant facing his mistakes, and he hadn't had the courage for that. He'd foolishly thought ignoring everything would make it all go away. I nodded slowly, trying to process his words while fighting back the tears that threatened to fall. When I asked if he had ever thought about me, his voice trembled as he said he thought about me every day. But those thoughts only reminded him of his sins, he said. He didn't know how to make amends, but if I could forgive him, he wanted to try. I sat there in silence, overwhelmed by the conversation I had waited years to have. Part of me wanted to forgive him, while another part still clung to the anger I'd carried for so long. I told him softly that it wouldn't be easy, but if he was truly committed to starting over, Before I could finish my thought, the door burst open and Chloe stormed in, her face twisted with anger. She demanded to know what I was doing there. I tried to explain that I just wanted to help fix things, but the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. I tried to keep my voice steady as I faced Chloe's anger, hanging by her every word. I heard the bitter sarcasm in her voice as she mocked my attempts to become part of their family, asking how I could think it would be so simple. Ryan felt the tension rise as he tried to intervene and asked Chloe to stay calm. Then she cried out loud, tears streaming down her face, demanding that we think this is normal. Her mother was dead, and now her family was expected to accept evidence of her father's betrayal. My heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice as I stood up, the pain of her words impossible to ignore. I told them that I never wanted to be a burden, that if my presence was causing so much pain, I would stay away. At that moment, Matthew showed up and his intervention changed the hostile atmosphere in the room. He suggested that if their mother had accepted me, they should try to do the same, even if it couldn't happen right away. I watched as Chloe stared at her brother in disbelief, asking if he was really taking my side. Matthew's response was simple but powerful. He was on their mother's side, and she would have wanted them to try, even if it took time. A heavy silence filled the room as we all absorbed Matthew's words. Then Chloe left without another word, leaving the rest of us standing in a tension so thick it felt like we could touch it.
That night a storm hit the town and the weather became very bad. Thunder rumbled overhead, the sound was intense, and the wind was pounding against the windows. Ryan stood watching the tempest, seeing in it a mirror of his own life's chaos, yet in this darkness, he found a strange resolve to mend the broken bonds of his family, no matter how long it might take. Lightning split the sky, illuminating empty streets for brilliant seconds while thunder merged with the relentless rain, creating a symphony of nature's fury. Inside their respective sanctuaries, each family member faced their own personal storms. Chloe sat on the floor in her room, clutching her mother's letter, eyes swollen from crying, but angry. She read Stephanie's words over and over, searching desperately for answers, seeking something to ease the ache in her heart. How could you be so strong? How could you forgive? How could you move on? She whispered in a trembling voice. Meanwhile, Matthew was in his father's study, sifting through old photographs and documents that spoke of simpler times. He discovered an album filled with childhood memories, but these once happy moments now felt like beautiful lies. Then he found something that stopped his heart, a letter from Louise, Sienna's mother, to Stephanie. After a moment's hesitation, curiosity won out and he broke the seal. The letter's contents were both simple and devastating. Louise wasn't seeking forgiveness, only wanting Stephanie to know the truth about Sienna being Ryan's daughter. She confessed that Ryan didn't know about the letter, but insisted Stephanie had a right to know, pleading not to blame him entirely, admitting her own mistakes, and expressing hope for Stephanie to find peace. As Matthew read it, he realized that his mother had known this truth for a long time and had accepted it, and he was filled with admiration for her generosity. In his hotel room, Ryan nursed a whiskey that offered no comfort, only a slight dulling of his pain. He watched raindrops trace patterns down his window like tears, contemplating how he had managed to destroy everything he held dear. A knock at the door pulled him from his dark reverie, and he opened it to find Kendra standing there, soaked and trembling. "What are you doing here?" he asked, surprise evident in his voice. "What do you think?" Kendra's accusing voice cut through the room like a knife. "I need answers. I can't wait anymore." Ryan sighed deeply but let her in, knowing her presence would only complicate things further but unable to turn her away. Kendra placed her wet coat on a chair and fixed Ryan with eyes full of anger and desperation. "What are we?" she asked, vain and explosive. "What am I to you?" Kendra demanded, her voice trembling with emotion. "Since Stephanie died, I feel abandoned, like I never mattered at all. Ryan covered his face with weary hands, explaining that nothing was simple anymore. His family was broken, he had no idea how to fix it, and she was part of the whole mess. Part of it? Kendra echoed in disbelief, her voice sharp as broken glass. Is that all I am? Just another item on your endless list of problems? Before Ryan could respond, the door opened and Chloe appeared, freezing at the sight of Kendra as rage colored her face. Why is she here? Chloe screamed, pointing at Kendra like an accusing angel. First Sienna, and now I find you're still with your mistress. Ryan pleaded for calm, but Chloe's fury would not be contained. How dare you tell me to calm down, she shot back through angry tears. This woman is one reason Mom's heart was broken. And now what, are we supposed to accept her too? Kendra lifted her chin defiantly, declaring that she hadn't killed their mother. She suggested if Chloe needed someone to blame, she should blame her father. He was the one who destroyed their family, not her. Ryan was hurt by what he said, but he kept quiet. Get out! Chloe screamed, her trembling finger still pointed at Kendra. Kendra stared at Ryan, waiting for him to defend her, but his silence spoke volumes. Without another word, she grabbed her coat and slammed the door behind her. In the aftermath of the confrontation, only Ryan and Chloe remained, the tension between them thick enough to cut. How long is this going to go on? Haven't we suffered enough already because of you? How much pain do you have to cause me before you're satisfied? Chloe asked, her voice trembling with desperation. When Ryan tried to approach her, she stepped back as if his touch might burn. Don't touch me. I don't want anything from you anymore, she said in a cold voice. With those final, cutting words, Chloe left, leaving Ryan alone with only the storm's fury to witness his despair.
I sat alone in my hotel room that stormy night, holding the ring my mother had given me before she passed away. Though it was a simple piece of jewelry, to me it was more precious than any diamond because it carried the weight of my mother Louise's love and sacrifice. As I turned the ring in my fingers, memories of my mother flooded my mind, how she had given up so much to raise me, how she had tried to shield me from the painful truth about my father. Are you proud of me, Mom? I whispered into the empty room, my voice barely audible above the storm outside. My heart ached as I confessed my doubts to her memory, telling her that though I was trying to do the right thing, I wasn't sure if I was making the right choices. Those words lingered in the solitude of my room as the storm raged outside my window, as turbulent as the complex emotions inside me.
After the storm, the morning dawned calm. Chloe hadn't slept at all, her eyes swollen from crying, her body exhausted but her mind refusing to rest. From her balcony, she gazed down at the garden her mother had tended with such devotion, the rain-kissed flowers seeming to weep alongside her. I remembered the days when I learned to care for roses with my mother. She would smile softly and say, "Even thorns can be valuable if you care for them with love." Those words now felt as distant as stars, barely visible through the fog of grief. "Mom, you always gave everything your all," Chloe whispered, fighting back the emotion threatening to choke her. "But we can't be as strong as you were." In the living room, Matthew was sitting on the couch, holding Louise's letter. He had spent hours pondering its words, feeling the weight of this stranger who had played such a pivotal role in his father's life, and by extension, his own. "What would you do, Mom?" he murmured, looking up at Stephanie's portrait on the wall, searching for answers in her painted smile. His mind raced with thoughts of how to escape this maze of confusion and hurt. A knock at the door, sharp and sudden, caught his attention.
I stood nervously at their door that morning, holding a small box that felt as heavy as all my hopes and fears combined. When Matthew opened the door, I apologized for coming so early, my eyes darting away as I explained I had something to show them. Though he frowned, Matthew let me in, but our moment was interrupted by Chloe coming down the stairs. She stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me, demanding to know why I was there. I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained I wasn't there to cause problems, only to share something their mother had entrusted to me. I watched surprise flicker across Chloe's face as she questioned this revelation. With trembling hands, I placed the box on the table and opened it, revealing their mother's worn leather diary and some old photographs. My heart pounded as they cautiously approached to look at the contents. When Chloe whispered, "Mom's diary," as she recognized Stephanie's handwriting, I felt the weight of the moment pressing down on all of us. Matthew picked up one of the photos showing Stephanie and me together in the park, both smiling. I confirmed what the photo showed, that she had truly accepted me. My voice shook as I explained how I'd been full of anger when she first found me, unable to forgive Ryan for never being part of my life. I told them how she had taught me that life wasn't just black and white, showing me how to see beyond my own pain. As Chloe read the first page of the diary aloud, describing me as a strong girl with pain in my eyes, I felt those same eyes filling with tears. When she asked why her mother had never told them, I explained gently that Stephanie had wanted to protect them, to keep them from carrying a burden that wasn't theirs to bear. Afterwards, we sat in silence and accepted this newly revealed truth. I felt my heart swell with hope as Matthew told Chloe that their mother had been right, suggesting they should try to accept reality, if not for anything else, then for Stephanie's sake. Through the morning window, I watched as something shifted in Chloe's expression, perhaps the first signs of letting go of her anger and seeking healing instead. Later, I learned that Ryan had visited Stephanie's grave, bringing her favorite white roses and kneeling before her headstone. He had spoken to her, not asking for forgiveness, but promising to change for her sake, for their children, and for me. When Ryan finally returned home around noon, he found us all in the living room. The atmosphere was different now, still fragile, but somehow gentler than before. Matthew showed him the diary and photographs, and I watched as Ryan's emotions played across his face, grief and gratitude mingling in his tears. He could barely speak as he read Stephanie's words, finally admitting that she had been too good for him. Chloe's response carried a tiny glimmer of empathy when she agreed, adding that they would try harder too. That day ended with a sense of hope, like sunlight breaking through after a storm. As dawn arrived the next morning, it seemed to herald new beginnings. Inside the house, though emotions still ran high and the air felt heavy, something had definitely changed. My presence still created some awkwardness, but the strong rejection I'd felt before had begun to fade. Stephanie's diary and photos had planted seeds of understanding in Chloe and Matthew's hearts. Early that morning, I watched as Chloe went silently to the garden, picking up pruning shears to tend her mother's beloved roses. Each time she cut a rose, it felt like a connection to the memory of her mother and an attempt to find her own strength. From my window, I saw Matthew watching his sister, clearly moved by her efforts to follow in their mother's footsteps. I quietly prepared coffee in the kitchen that morning, still feeling like an outsider but determined not to give up. I had made a promise to Stephanie to become part of this family, and I was committed to that goal no matter how long it might take. Breakfast was still tense, but somehow gentler than before, as I watched Ryan sit at the edge of the table, looking at his children and me with eyes full of both guilt and hope. When Ryan finally broke the silence, saying he needed to talk, I noticed how Chloe lifted her face to look directly at him while Matthew nodded. I stayed quiet, watching as Ryan spoke with raw emotion, not asking for forgiveness but promising to do whatever was needed to repair their relationships, not for his sake, but for theirs. My heart ached as I heard Chloe's angry response, telling him she couldn't believe him. Ryan admitted he didn't expect belief, only the chance to prove he could change, explaining how Stephanie had taught him the power of forgiveness. In the silence that followed, I watched Matthew studying his sister's face, trying to gauge if she was willing to try. When Matthew suggested they should try, if only for their mother's sake, I felt the tension in the room shift slightly. I saw Chloe take a deep breath, her anger visibly softening though she wasn't ready to forgive. Later, I went to visit Stephanie's grave, needing to express my gratitude. Kneeling before her headstone with flowers in my hands, I felt her spirit around me. Through my tears, I whispered my thanks for her belief in me, and promised to honor her trust. I sensed Chloe's presence before I heard her, and when she asked if I planned to stay, her voice lacked its previous hostility. Standing slowly, I told her about my promise to her mother, about wanting to be part of this family despite knowing it would take time. When Chloe admitted she still couldn't trust me but wanted to believe her mother had seen something in me worth accepting, I felt the first real spark of hope. Her decision to try was just one small step, but to me, it felt like a giant leap forward.
Meanwhile, Ryan had steeled himself to confront his past, dialing Kendra's number with trembling fingers. He asked to meet at a local cafe, knowing he couldn't move forward without closing this chapter of his life properly. When Kendra arrived, her face was filled with anger and sadness, and I could tell a complex set of emotions was swirling inside her. She sat opposite him, arms folded as if to protect her heart, and coldly asked him why he had called her. "Let's put this to an end," Ryan said with quiet determination, and we both heard it. He couldn't keep hurting the people he loved, he explained, his voice heavy with the weight of his decision. A bitter smile curved Kendra's lips as she asked if he'd suddenly decided to do the right thing, after causing her so much pain. "I know it's not fair," Ryan admitted, his words barely a whisper. "I wish you well, Kendra, but I can't be with you anymore." Kendra continued to look at him with emotion, tears in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She rose from her chair with silent dignity and walked away, leaving Ryan alone with his thoughts and the bitter dregs of his coffee.
I sat with Chloe and Matthew as we read through Stephanie's diary together, each page revealing more about the remarkable woman who had touched all our lives. Every word seemed to remind us of her strength and her incredible capacity to love and forgive, no matter what life threw at her. I heard the awe in Matthew's voice as he commented on what an amazing person she had been. I could only nod in agreement, feeling a mixture of sadness and gratitude wash over me, as I remembered her kindness. Chloe remained silent beside us, but I sensed something beginning to change within her. Her heart, which had been tightly closed, was beginning to open up, little by little. Maybe, just maybe, I thought, we were all starting to find a way forward, guided by Stephanie's words and the love she had left behind.
That night, beneath a sky full of glittering stars, the broken family took their first tentative steps toward reconciliation. The road ahead was by no means easy, but a small glimmer of hope lay in their path through the darkness. The house, which had witnessed so many tears and secrets, seemed wrapped in a quieter atmosphere, though the weight of the past still lingered in every corner. In the kitchen, Chloe went through the motions of making coffee, her movements automatic while her mind wandered through the events of recent days. Her mother's words from the diary echoed in her thoughts, making her wonder if she too could find the strength to forgive as Stephanie had. Matthew came into the room yawning, holding his mother's diary in his arms. He settled across from his sister, his expression a mixture of concern and hope as he studied her face. "Do you think we'll be okay?" he asked, breaking the morning silence. Chloe sighed, carefully pouring coffee as she admitted she wasn't sure. Everything felt complicated, but their mother had wanted them to remain a family, and part of her wanted to honor that wish. Matthew suggested they could start by getting to know Sienna better, believing that's what their mother would have wanted. Chloe nodded slowly, and though doubt still lingered in her heart, the knowledge that her mother had trusted them with this situation strengthened her resolve to find a way forward. Meanwhile, Ryan tended to Stephanie's beloved flowers in the garden, finding in this simple act a way to remember her and feel connected to her spirit.
I stood watching Ryan from a distance, my heart a mixture of curiosity and sadness. Even after everything that had happened, I found myself yearning for a better relationship with my father. Finally gathering my courage, I approached him and asked if I could help with the gardening. When he looked up with a small smile, telling me I was welcome to join as these flowers needed more care than he'd thought, I felt a tiny flutter of hope. We worked in silence for a while, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like we were slowly building a bridge between us, one moment at a time. Eventually, I found the courage to tell him how Stephanie had often talked about him, always insisting he had a good heart. I watched him pause in surprise at my words, admitting he wasn't sure if that was true but acknowledging that Stephanie always saw the best in people. That's why everyone loved her, I said softly, adding that I wanted to honor her memory by becoming part of this family, just as she had wished. Later that afternoon, Chloe and Matthew took me to a park they used to visit with their mother when they were young. I understood this was their way of trying to welcome me into their world by sharing something special. The park was full of life, children playing, couples walking hand in hand, elderly people feeding pigeons. The scene reminded us all of simpler times, before secrets and lies had complicated our lives. Matthew pointed to a bench under a large tree, telling me it had been their mother's favorite spot, where she always found peace. I sat on that bench, closing my eyes and trying to imagine Stephanie there, letting the wind and birdsong wash over me. When I asked what else she had liked, I managed a small smile, hoping to learn more about the woman who had accepted me so completely. I noticed Chloe watching me quietly, and though I knew she still struggled to accept me, I could sense her beginning to understand why her mother had seen something worthwhile in me.
When I got home, I found Ryan in the living room poring over a collection of old photos filled with precious memories. He held up one particular image that captured a moment frozen in time, Chloe and Matthew as children with Stephanie, her radiant smile lighting up the photograph, her eyes overflowing with unconditional love. She was the heart of this family. Ryan's voice trembled with emotion as he spoke, vowing to honor her memory by doing everything in his power to heal what was broken. Chloe and Matthew exchanged glances, understanding the depth of their father's regret while knowing that some wounds take more than good intentions to heal. The room was silent, the atmosphere a mixture of hope and hesitation, all encapsulated in that one precious photograph, where past and present intersected.
That night, while everyone else had retired to their rooms, I sat down with my notebook, feeling compelled to write a letter to Stephanie. My hands trembled slightly as I began writing, trying to pour out all my gratitude and feelings onto the paper. Dear Stephanie, I wrote, struggling to find words adequate enough to express my overwhelming thankfulness for everything she had done for me. I told her how she had not only given me the chance to meet my father and siblings, but had taught me about the transformative power of love and forgiveness. I promised to honor her memory by becoming the person she had believed I could be, and assured her that she would forever live in my heart, no matter where I was. As I closed the notebook, I allowed my tears to fall freely down my cheeks for the first time in days. Those tears felt cleansing somehow, as if they were washing away some of the burden I had been carrying. Over the next few weeks, our family took further small steps toward reconciliation. We began spending more time together, having more honest conversations, and I could feel the walls between us slowly starting to crumble. It wasn't always easy, there were still days filled with tension and arguments. But like rays of sunshine peeking through the storm clouds, hope helped me to believe that our family was moving in the right direction.